Why is the widow still living here? She didn't whisper it. She didn't lower her voice or glance around to see if I might be nearby. No, she said it like she was ordering coffee, like it was a fair question with an obvious answer. I was standing just around the corner of the hallway, one hand still on the dish towel I'd used to dry the salad bowl. The words hung there, like steam in the kitchen, thick, wet, impossible to ignore. The widow. That's what she called me. Not Elena. Not Mama. Not even Nana. Just the widow, as though I were an inconvenient title they were trying to quietly erase from the deed. My son said nothing. I listened to the silence stretch between them like it was another wall they'd built to keep me out. I didn't flinch. Not right away. I stood quietly in my own hallway, in a house where my fingerprints lived on every cupboard and every tile. My legs stiffened, but my hands stayed busy, folding the towel again. It wasn't about politeness, it was about grounding. I was trying to feel something solid beneath me. Because what I'd just heard, that was the moment something shifted. The house used to sound different. I remember when the kitchen echoed with the soft bubbling of tomato sauce, the clink of spoons in coffee cups, and the rhythmic tapping of my late husband's spoon against the side of his espresso glass. Lorenzo always stirred 5 times, exactly 5. A superstition from his nonno that I never quite understood, but never challenged. We built this house together in 1984. 2 bedrooms, 1 sunroom he insisted we'd never use, and ended up living in every morning after retirement. The tiles in the foyer? I laid those myself, crawling on hands and knees with a trowel while 8 months pregnant. The lemon tree in the backyard? He planted it the week our first grandchild was born. Everything in this home has a memory tied to it. And now I was being referred to like a relic. The trouble started slow, like mold under paint. After Lorenzo passed, I fell quiet. It wasn't grief like the movies, sobbing, howling, flailing grief. It was a stillness, an ache that lived in the joints, in the hours after dinner, in the middle seat of the car. My son Luca offered to move in, said it would help me feel less alone. I didn't argue. I told myself it would be temporary, a little warmth in a cold stretch of life. They moved in within 2 weeks. Marta, his wife, came with scented candles that made the house smell like a hotel, and a box labeled kitchen things that she unloaded without so much as asking where my own knives went. At first I said nothing. What was there to say? Grief makes you generous. Or maybe just tired. They started small, rearranging drawers, adding a second Wi-Fi router, putting up a new shower curtain in the bathroom, Lorenzo tiled by hand. I let it happen. Then came the jokes. Harmless, at first. Marta telling her friends on speakerphone that living with a senior is like living with a ghost that forgets how the thermostat works. Luca chuckled. He always chuckled. But then she stopped knocking before entering my room, started calling it the guest space, even though all my clothes were still folded in that dresser. Even though the lace doily on the nightstand was crocheted by my mother during the war, I didn't push back. I didn't want to be the difficult one. But this? Why is the widow still living here? As if I were a squatter. As if I hadn't paid off the mortgage with a catering job and double shifts in the linen factory. As if I hadn't nursed my husband in the living room for 3 years while cancer gnawed him down to skin and whispers. That sentence didn't just insult me, it rewrote me, recast me as an extra in my own story. I turned slowly and walked back into the kitchen. Quiet. Measured. They were sitting at the table, my table. I'd hand-sanded that surface during the summer of '92. The stain had bubbled the first time, and I redid the whole thing while Luca was away at university. Marta sat with one knee over the other, scrolling through her phone like the house was her Airbnb. Luca was chewing toast and not meeting my eyes. I placed the dish towel on the counter. She looked up briefly and gave me that polite little nod she reserved for clerks and elderly neighbors. "Everything okay?" she asked, smiling like I hadn't heard her, like she hadn't declared her wish right out loud. "Fine," I said. "I'll be going out for a bit." "Where to?" she asked, still scrolling. "Nowhere important," I answered. "I just need some air." I left without my purse, without my phone, just my sweater and my keys. It was cool outside, and the lemons in the back tree were starting to yellow. I paused in the driveway, looked back at the windows. I could see movement inside. Marta walking past the hallway, Luca standing by the fridge. I'd raised that boy. Fed him fresh focaccia After school, darned his socks until he left for college, paid for every one of his books, bought him that suit he wore to prom. And now he let someone speak about me like I was luggage no one wanted to claim. I walked toward the park, unsure of what I was looking for. The air smelled like jasmine and salt. Birds overhead circled lazily. I sat on the first empty bench I found, pressed my hand over my chest, and waited for the sting to subside. It didn't, because something was happening deep inside me. A tiny, trembling thread was being pulled, quietly but with certainty. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. I looked at my hands, at the gold chain that Lorenzo gave me on our 10th anniversary. Then I whispered, not to anyone in particular, but to myself, I think they've forgotten whose name is on the deed. And just like that, the quiet was no longer heavy. It was sharp. It was mine. When I returned from the park, the house felt different. Not quieter, just emptier. Marta was on the phone in the living room, pacing in socks, her tone clipped and casual, as if her day hadn't started by trying to rewrite the story of who belonged here. Luca was gone. His shoes were missing from the mat, and the car wasn't in the driveway. I moved slowly, listening to the house more than entering it. The air still smelled faintly of her coconut-scented candles, the ones that always gave me headaches but she insisted made the place feel modern. She didn't acknowledge me. She just kept talking. I know, but she's still here. Yes, I thought it would be different by now. No, Luca hasn't said anything directly, but she'll leave soon. She's, well, old. That was the second knife of the day. I didn't say a word. I went to my room, the one she now referred to as the guest suite, and closed the door with quiet finality. I sat on the edge of the bed and took a deep breath. I wasn't angry, not in the flailing, dramatic way they expected a woman my age to be. I was something deeper, something slower and more certain. There's a kind of dignity that only shows itself when you've been underestimated long enough. I'd spent my life making do, making peace, and making meals, but I'd also spent it signing documents, sitting in on bank meetings, and reading every line of every form Lorenzo ever put in front of me. He used to say I had a better head for the numbers anyway. That's why he put everything in both our names, just in case. Just in case. I opened the bottom drawer of my dresser and slid aside a stack of folded scarves. Beneath them sat a leather folio. Lorenzo gave it to me on our 30th anniversary. At the time, it held love letters and photos of our trip to Amalfi. But after his diagnosis, it took on a different purpose. Inside were deeds, insurance policies, the trust documents, and the title to the house. I traced my finger across the embossed seal at the bottom. Elena Romano. Not Marta. Not Luca. Mine. I took the folder and placed it gently on the bed. Then I changed into my walking shoes, tied my scarf around my neck, and tucked the folder into my tote bag. No one asked where I was going. No one ever did. My first stop was at the notary's office, 2 blocks from the old church. A small building with dusty blinds and a receptionist who wore thick red lipstick and tapped her nails on the counter like a nervous metronome. Elena Romano, I said softly. I need a certified copy of this title and a witness form. I'm preparing for a transition. The receptionist blinked. Do you have ID? I handed her my license and waited. While she made the copies, I stared at the wall clock. The second hand moved in clean, sharp ticks, just like my thoughts now. It took 15 minutes. When I left, I had a thick manila envelope tucked under my arm, and the distant feeling that I had crossed a threshold I couldn't return from. Next, I stopped by the cafe near the marina, not because I needed coffee, but because I needed to remember who I was before they tried to make me forget. The waitress, Livia, smiled when she saw me. Signora Elena, it's been too long. Too long indeed, I replied. Do you still make the lemon tarts? For you? Always. She brought me a tart and a cappuccino. I sat outside, facing the water, and for a moment I let myself feel something soft again. But it didn't last. Across the cobbled street was an office with a green door. Real estate. I stared at that door for a long time. They had a walk-in hour posted, no appointment necessary, confidential consultations, welcome. I paid for my tart, left a tip on the tray, and walked across the street. The receptionist was a young man with a gold earring and a bored expression until I said my name and mentioned the property. His whole face changed. That's a valuable lot, he said. 2 blocks from the coast. You said the title's clear? It's in my name only, I replied. And you're looking to sell? I paused, let the word fill the room before I owned it. Yes. Quietly, fast. We discussed numbers, timelines, and terms. He pulled up comps on a screen, and I watched years of sacrifice turn into digits with too many zeros. I didn't flinch. I asked about anonymous listings, no open houses, off-market deals. He nodded. Absolutely. We have buyers lined up for properties like this. Cash buyers. I can get a showing ready within the week. I signed a preliminary interest form. His name was Carlo, and he handed me his card like it was a secret. Call me when you're ready, Signora Romano. I placed the card inside my folio. I'm ready, I said, just not quite yet. By the time I returned home, the sun had slipped low behind the lemon tree, casting long shadows across the side of the house. Marta was still on the phone. She didn't see me walk in. I stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the woman who wanted me gone, and then I walked to my room, locked the door, and laid the real estate card on my nightstand. It wasn't about revenge. It was about remembering who I was before they tried to rename me. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Old habits never leave. Lorenzo used to rise early for the markets, and I followed, not because I had to, but because I liked the quiet before the house woke up. Back then, that stillness felt like something sacred. These days, it felt like armor. I moved slowly through the kitchen, careful not to wake Marta or Luca. The tile was cold beneath my slippers, and the scent of her synthetic lavender plug-in still lingered. I hated it, but I left it in the wall. Not every battle was worth the energy. I brewed coffee the old way, with the mocha pot Lorenzo and I brought back from Naples. It hissed and bubbled on the stove, filling the room with a scent that reminded me this was still my home. They just happened to be living in it. When the sun finally crept in through the blinds, I poured myself a cup and walked out to the backyard. The lemon tree stood tall in the corner, heavy with fruit. I ran my fingers across one of the branches. The bark was cracked and lined, like my hands, but still firm, still rooted. The yard had once been my pride. Now it was cluttered with Luca's broken grill and Marta's forgotten yoga mat. They treated it like borrowed space, temporary, but I knew better. This ground had been fought for, every weed pulled by hand, every stone in the garden path laid by us. They didn't see that. They never asked why the steps curved a little to the left, or why the rosemary grew wild near the fence. They thought it was accidental, but everything here had intention. They just hadn't stayed long enough in their own skin to see it. After breakfast, mine, not theirs, I made a list. Things to remove before the house sells. Lorenzo's toolbox. My wedding photo from the hallway. The letters I kept in the green tin under the laundry sink. The espresso cups we used only on Sundays. It wasn't that I was sentimental. It was that some things shouldn't be left to people who never noticed them. Marta stumbled into the kitchen around 9, bleary-eyed and still in pajama shorts. She didn't say good morning, just opened the fridge, frowned, and said, "We're out of almond milk again." I didn't respond. She shut the fridge hard. "Did you use it?" "I don't drink almond milk," I said plainly, without looking up from my list. She scoffed and walked off. Luca didn't appear until nearly noon. Hair unbrushed, shirt wrinkled. He kissed my cheek distractedly and asked if I'd seen his laptop charger. "Did you check the office?" I offered. His head tilted, annoyed. "Which office?" "Marta uses the sunroom now." My mouth twitched. Ah, yes. The sunroom I once filled with succulents and quiet reading mornings. Now it was where she held her virtual Pilates sessions. "No," I said, "I haven't seen it." He mumbled something and disappeared again. That afternoon, I called Carlo. He answered on the second ring. "Ready?" he asked. "Listing by Thursday," I said. "I want it done before Easter." "You'll have an offer within a week," he promised. "Cash, no contingencies." Perfect. We arranged for a discreet showing schedule. No signs, no marketing. The buyers would think it was a pocket listing, something exclusive, something rare. I almost laughed. That's exactly what this house was. In the evening, Marta announced from the kitchen island that her mother would be coming to stay the following weekend. "She'll need the guest room," she said. I was buttering toast. She didn't look up. "The guest room," I repeated. Yes, your room. I placed the butter knife down carefully. Where am I meant to sleep? She shrugged. Luca said maybe the couch? Just for a few nights. Just a few nights. In my house, in my bed, on my couch. I didn't argue. Not because I agreed, but because I'd already won. That night, I emptied my drawers, one by one, slowly, without emotion. My scarves went into a single suitcase, my photos into a shoebox. I wrapped a wedding photo in 2 layers of Lorenzo's old dress shirts. The letters were the hardest, dozens of them. Some written by Lorenzo during their engagement, others by me during the war. They were never romantic, not in the classic sense, but they were filled with small truths. Grocery lists turned to love notes. Weather reports, laced with longing. They were ours. I tucked them into the green tin, then into the suitcase. The whole process took hours, but by midnight, everything that mattered fit into one case, one box, and one folder. Everything else, furniture, dishes, the piano, Luca never learned to play, they could keep. Let them have the bones. I was leaving with the soul. In the early hours, I sat in the living room. The quiet now didn't ache. It hummed. It was a silence of certainty. Marta's almond milk sat untouched on the counter. Luca's shoes were still crooked on the mat, one half smashed from his habit of stepping on the heel. These people had lived here for months and never once asked about the painting in the hallway, the hand-woven rug in the foyer, or why the bathroom door creaked when it rained. They didn't know the house. They only used it. I wrote a letter, just one, to Luca. Short, sharp, final. It read, "This house was built with hands you never saw bleed. It was paid for with savings you never asked about, and it was entrusted to me, not borrowed by you. You'll have 21 days to vacate." Marta asked why the widow still lives here. Soon, she won't have to. I didn't sign it. Mom, just Alina. Let him read that name and remember who I was before he forgot. Marta didn't notice the letter on the hallway table that morning, but Luca did. He found it while reaching for his keys, freshly shaved and wearing the shirt I'd ironed 2 days earlier, the one he hadn't bothered to thank me for. He stood there for a full minute, reading, rereading, his eyes twitching across each line, like the words might rearrange themselves into something less permanent. They didn't. "Ma," he called out, his voice low and careful. "What's this?" I was in the kitchen, zesting a lemon, the rind curled into thin yellow ribbons against the grater. I didn't. "You read it," I said. His footsteps came slower than I expected, hesitant. I could tell from the sound that he didn't know whether to be angry or embarrassed. "You're selling the house." "I am." "To who?" "Someone who knows what respect looks like." He set the letter down beside the cutting board. "Come on, Ma," he said. "Is this really necessary?" I turned to face him. For once, I let the silence do the talking. Because here's the thing about silence. When you use it long enough, people start to fill it with their own guilt. They hear things they don't want to admit. Luca was no exception. He scratched the back of his neck and looked down. "We just didn't think you'd mind if Marta's mother." "You didn't think at all." He flinched, just slightly. I wiped my hands and folded the kitchen towel in half. "I gave you space," I said. "I gave you time. I even gave you the room I shared with your father for 40 years, and you gave me almond milk and eviction." "Ma, it wasn't like that." She asked why the widow still lives here. He blinked. I let that hang, in the air. "I'm not kicking you out," I continued. "I'm ending the arrangement." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was a sound behind him. Marta entering the hallway, her heels clicking on the tile like a metronome counting down her performance. "What's going on?" she asked, stepping into the kitchen. Her eyes landed on the letter. She didn't even try to mask the suspicion. Just picked it up, skimmed it, and laughed. "A letter," she said. "You're evicting us with a letter." "No," I replied calmly. That was a courtesy. I turned back to the lemon, sliding the knife through its center, clean and slow. She placed the paper back down as if it were infected. "You can't do this." "I can." "You don't have the authority." "I do." She paused, searching Luca's face for support. But he didn't speak. He just stood there, shoulders sinking, jaw twitching like he was trying to chew regret into something palatable. They didn't understand it yet. The depth of it. They thought this was temporary, that I was bluffing. that maybe, with the right apology, or the right blend of flattery and manipulation, I'd fold. But I'd already folded too many times: sheets, shirts, birthday banners, and boundaries. Not anymore. The following day, Carlo brought the buyer. She was a woman in her 50s, sharp in a navy blazer and nude lipstick. Divorced, he said. 2 grown children. Wanted a place to call her own. No fuss. No drama. Perfect. We met in the garden, beneath the lemon tree. I served coffee. Real coffee, not the pod kind Marta stalked. The buyer looked around, then smiled. This house has bones. I nodded. That's what I'm selling. She extended her hand. I'd like to make an offer today. Inside, Marta and Luca sat in the sunroom, pretending they weren't listening. They didn't know the offer would bypass escrow, that the deposit was wired within the hour, or that Carlo had already emailed them the legal notices required by tenant law. 21 days. 3 weeks. Not a day more. That evening, the atmosphere in the house turned brittle. Marta didn't speak to me. She cooked for herself and left the pans in the sink. Luca walked around like a ghost, half shrinking into his own shadow. I cleaned up, like I always had. But this time, I did it for the house, not them. The next morning, I packed Lorenzo's toolbox. Each wrench, each screwdriver wrapped in cloth like relics. I found the bent hammer he used to hang our first clock, the one that chimed off-key but still reminded us it was dinner time. I wrapped it slowly, placed it in the bottom of the case. Not because I needed it. Because I owed it. That much. Luca came to my door that night. Knocked softly. Can we talk? I opened it. He looked older than usual, not because of the lines on his face, but the weight behind his eyes. I didn't mean for this to happen, he said. I know. I didn't realize how far we'd gone. You didn't look. He nodded, swallowing hard. I was stupid. No, I corrected him. You were careless. He didn't argue. I miss Dad, he said suddenly. That stopped me. I miss him too, I whispered. Then we stood there for a long time, not reconciling, not hugging, just existing, 2 people who shared blood but had forgotten how to share space. After he left, I folded a small piece of paper and slid it into my suitcase. It wasn't from Lorenzo. It was from me. A note that read, "Letting go doesn't mean you lost. It means you finally stopped waiting for someone else to notice you were still holding on." The next morning, I placed the sold sticker on the folder. The house would be finalized in 12 days, just enough time to gather what I loved and leave what I didn't. I stood in the center of the living room and looked around. My plants were still alive, my books still dusted, my lemon tree still blooming. Let them say whatever they wanted when I was gone. She was just the widow. No, she was the one who built the house, raised the son, forgave too much, and still left with her name intact. The first day after the notice, Marta slammed cabinets. That was her protest. No shouting, no asking why or how, just noise, violent, shallow noise. The kind that says, I want control back, but don't know how to ask for it. I said nothing. I moved through the house like water does through stone, slow, steady, inevitable. She'd cleared the top shelf in the fridge and labeled it with her name in Sharpie. That made me laugh, quietly, behind the cupboard door. Possession meant so little to her when it was legal, but now she wanted to mark her territory like a child with a marker. Let her. Luca avoided me that morning. He left early, a bag slung over his shoulder like he was headed off to college again. He didn't say goodbye. I watched him from the window. It didn't hurt like I thought it might. There was no sting left in that silence, just clarity. He'd been slipping away for years. I was just finally done following. By mid-afternoon, Marta was on the phone. She's serious, Mom. Like legal letter serious. I don't know. I don't even think Luca saw this coming. Yeah, the lawyer said we don't have standing. It's her house. I thought the widow thing would be enough of a hint. She laughed then. The brittle kind of laugh that has more fear in it than humor. I sliced oranges in the kitchen and made marmalade. The scent of citrus filled the air. It reminded me of spring, of Lorenzo's hands, sticky with syrup, his laugh booming from the kitchen table as he dipped crusty bread in fresh jam. They didn't know those memories. And soon, they wouldn't breathe that air anymore. Day 3, Marta asked where she was supposed to go. She asked, like I owed her an answer. I stirred pasta sauce and responded gently, "That's not my concern, Mart." She blinked. "You're really doing this?" "I really am." "What kind of mother does this to her son?" I looked up from the stove. The kind of mother who finally remembered she has a spine. She didn't respond. She just turned away, but slower this time, like she was beginning to see she was talking to someone she'd never bothered to know. By the end of the first week, boxes appeared. Not mine, hers. She packed loudly, let the packing tape snap, with the sharpness of a whip. She left the boxes half-sealed in the hallway, blocking the coat closet and muttering as if I might apologize for it. I didn't. I cleaned the baseboards, instead, a toothbrush and lemon oil. Marta passed me twice without speaking. Her perfume hung in the air too thickly, like she was trying to claim the oxygen too. Didn't matter. I had already breathed in the next life. Day 9. Luca cooked dinner. Pasta. Not bad. He offered me a plate, and I accepted, wordlessly. We ate in silence, not the tense kind, but the kind that feels like a truce. "I know I messed up," he said softly. I nodded. "I know too." He stared into his glass of water like it might answer the question for him. "I think I forgot who you were." "That happens," I said, "but some of us never stop remembering." He didn't cry, but something in him crumbled. I could see it, clear as day. The days passed in rhythms. I removed Lorenzo's books from the living room shelves, the ones they'd never touched, never even dusted. I found the photo album Marta, shoved into a drawer after redecorating, and carried it to my room. I flipped through pages of birthdays, Sunday picnics, Lorenzo holding Luca's feet in a bucket of seawater after a jellyfish sting. So many small things they'd never bothered to ask about. Let them take their yoga mats and their boxed wine. I'd keep the stories. On day 12, Marta tried again. "Can't we just find another way?" she asked. "Split it? Stay a little longer?" I looked at her, straight in the eyes. "Your mother doesn't belong here. You don't speak to me like family. You moved into my house and called me a widow like I was a ghost. And now you want to negotiate terms?" She tried to smile. I was upset. "No," I said. "You were cruel, and now you're inconvenienced." She blinked. That smile faded like smoke in the wind. I turned back to the laundry basket and said, 12 days left. I suggest you use them wisely." That night, I stood on the porch, with a blanket draped over my shoulders. The air smelled like salt and rosemary. My lemon tree swayed softly in the breeze. I whispered to it, "Almost done, old f-." Day 15, the buyer returned to measure the rooms. She brought a designer, a clipboard, and a smile that felt kind. She complimented the floors, the baseboards, the garden. She asked me what kind of flowers I'd planted out front. "Perennials," I said. "They last longer." The designer took notes. "You can feel it," she said. "The love that's lived here." I looked around, and the silence that finally arrived. That evening, I found a note tucked under my door. From Luca. "Mus." I don't know what to say anymore. "I'm sorry. I miss Dad. I miss how things used to be. I know we got lost. I hope someday you'll let me find my way back." Well, I folded it and placed it inside the green tin with the rest of my truths. On day 18, I made one final trip to the lawyer. The documents were ready. The funds were in escrow. The deed, filed and final. I held the title in my lap on the ride home like a newborn. I wasn't afraid. Not of leaving. Not of what they'd say. Not of who I was without the word mother hung around my neck like a chain of debt. The house felt lighter that night. Like it had exhaled. 3 more days. Then I'd lock the door one last time. And this chapter, this life of being overlooked, used, dismissed, would close. Not with a bang, but with a quiet key turn, and the sound of my own footsteps walking forward. Day 19 began with rain. Not a storm, not the kind that shouts, but a soft, steady drizzle that painted the windows with streaks and blurred the world just enough to make it quiet. I stood by the kitchen sink, holding a chipped mug of black coffee, and watching the garden soak. The lemon tree shimmered, droplets clinging to each green leaf like tiny pearls. Even the rosemary, stubborn and scraggly, bowed gently to the sky. Lorenzo used to call this kind of rain good silence, the kind that didn't require anyone to talk. I stayed still for a long time. I wasn't waiting for anyone. Not anymore. Marta didn't come out of her room that morning. She hadn't spoken since the second buyer visit. I could hear her moving sometimes, doors creaking, drawers opening, but mostly she was silent. It didn't feel like guilt. It felt like calculation. Luca had left early again, maybe to clear his head, maybe to avoid the weight of the house as it shifted around him. His shoes were still muddy near the mat, and he hadn't refilled the kettle like I'd asked. But I didn't say anything. I wasn't here to teach anymore. That part of my job had ended the day he stopped listening. I spent the late morning gathering things they would never know mattered. A pressed flower from our 25th anniversary, flattened between pages of a cookbook Marta once threatened to throw away for being too old school. A small ceramic frog Lorenzo had bought me from a street vendor in Cinque Terre. Ugly as sin, but still on the windowsill because it made me laugh every time I looked at it. A photo strip from a carnival. Me and Luca, ages ago. My hair wind-blown, his eyes too big for his face. We were both laughing, caught in a moment before the world got so heavy. I placed them in a shoebox. Carefully, reverently. These were not artifacts. These were anchors. By afternoon, the rain had stopped, but the light outside never returned to full strength. It was that gray-blue calm that makes everything feel like it's holding its breath. Marta emerged around 2. Her hair was tied back, her face clean, her expression unreadable. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. I dried my hands on a dish towel and turned toward her. "I have exactly 3 days," I said. "What would you like to say during them?" She hesitated. Then, "I didn't mean to disrespect you," she said slowly. I thought you'd be gone by now. I didn't think we'd be here this long." "That's exactly the problem," I replied. "You moved into a house you didn't help build and assumed you'd inherit it by waiting." She winced, just slightly. "Luca said you'd never sell it." "I told Luca many things. He stopped listening around the time you started talking for him." She looked down at her hands. Her nails were chipped. She hadn't noticed. "I was scared," she said. "We had nowhere else to go." I nodded. "And instead of thanking me, you chose to erase me." She didn't cry. I didn't ask her to. She stood a few minutes later, cleared her throat, and walked to the door. But then she paused. "Were you ever going to say goodbye?" I tilted my head. "You mean before or after you offered my bed to your mother?" She swallowed hard and nodded. "Right." And then she was gone again. That night, I lit a candle in the sunroom. The good one, the one in the little clay holder I made in a pottery class, Lorenzo and I took when we were newly married. It was supposed to be a vase, but the bottom cracked in the kiln. He said it was perfect anyway. We used it for candles ever since. The room glowed gold. My suitcase sat by the door, already zipped. The green tin of letters rested beside it. My scarf, draped across the top, like it was waiting to be tied one last time. I made tea and sat in Lorenzo's old armchair. The cushion still dipped where he used to sit. My bones knew the shape. My spine fell into it like a memory. I held the mug in both hands and whispered to the silence. They thought I was the ghost. They'd called me the widow, acted like I was haunting them. But I had been here all along, breathing, remembering, forgiving. It wasn't me who had vanished. It was them. On day 20, I baked olive oil cake with lemon zest. The kind I made every Easter for 40 years. I didn't care if they ate it. I didn't bake it for them. I baked it for the house. For the walls that had held my secrets and my songs. For the floorboards that had creaked under Luca's tiny feet. For the windows that once steamed up while Lorenzo and I danced in the kitchen to old records on rainy days. The smell filled the house, rich and bittersweet. Marta came to the doorway and hovered. She didn't ask for a slice. But she closed her eyes for a second. Like she remembered something she wasn't part of. That night, I wrote a single note. To the new owner. This house has held more love than most people ever deserve. Please be gentle with the lemon tree. It favors the left side when it rains. And don't move the rug in the hallway. The boards underneath are a little uneven, but they're good bones, like most of us. ER. I folded the note and tucked it under the fruit bowl. Not as a warning. As a blessing. The last night in that house was quiet. No arguments. No manipulation. Just wind. And the sound of my heart letting go. Not in grief, but in gratitude. Because not every ending is a loss. Some are a return. To self. to dignity, to breath. Day 21 came, with sun. After days of gray drizzle, the light poured in like honey, golden, thick, warm. It slipped through the kitchen window and touched the floor tiles. Lorenzo and I had laid down ourselves, one by one, on our knees, backs aching, hands smudged with grout and music playing from a radio that barely got signal. I stood barefoot on those tiles now, a mug of espresso in hand, and whispered, "We did good, love." The scent of the lemon cake from the night before still clung faintly in the air. I let it linger. I wanted the house to breathe in that farewell. At 7:48 a.m., the doorbell rang. Carlo arrived first, always punctual, even when I wasn't. He stepped inside, removed his shoes without asking, and gave me a firm nod. "You ready?" I smiled. "I've been ready since the moment she called me a burden." He gave a low chuckle. "Well, they'll be served this morning, and the buyers will be here at noon. Once the walkthrough's done, all that's left is your signature." We didn't need to rehearse. Everything had been laid out weeks ago. This wasn't business now. It was closure. At 8:30, Marta came downstairs. Hair up, face blank. She glanced at Carlo, then at the paperwork on the table. She didn't ask. She didn't comment. Just went straight to the fridge and pulled out a yogurt. Some people still think silence is graceful. But hers wasn't grace. It was the sound of someone who thought they'd always have the last word, realizing they never even had the first one. I offered her a spoon. She didn't take it. Luca walked in half an hour later. His eyes darted to the envelope Carlo was holding. "You really did it." I nodded. "Yes." He rubbed the back of his neck like he always did when he was nervous. "When do we have to be out?" "By this evening." His jaw tightened. "That fast?" "Everything's been fast, Luca. You just didn't notice until it stopped benefiting you." That hit. I saw it. He didn't argue, just sat on the far stool by the counter and stared at the lemon tree through the window like it had something to say. At noon sharp, the buyers arrived. The woman in the navy blazer again, bright-eyed and warm. She brought her daughter this time, mid-20s, quiet, curious. They stepped inside and looked around with reverence, like they already loved it. Carlo made introductions. I shook hands. Marta stayed upstairs. Luca hovered. We began the walkthrough. I pointed out where the tiles creaked, where the windows liked to rattle when it rained, where the sunlight hit strongest in the late afternoon if you opened the back curtains just right. The daughter asked questions. The mother listened carefully. When we reached the hallway rug, I paused. "Don't move it," I said. "Not unless you want to fight the boards." They laughed softly. I did. In the sunroom. I lingered. "This was my reading room," I said. "Then it was their Pilates studio. Now it's yours." The mother tilted her head. "Do you mind us changing it?" I smiled. "Not at all. The house will adjust, as long as you don't ignore her." "Her?" the daughter asked. "She's a she," I said firmly. "All houses that remember are. And this one remembered everything." We returned to the kitchen. Carlo laid the final papers on the table. I didn't hesitate. My pen moved swiftly, precisely. With every stroke, I let go of a story that no longer served me. When I set the pen down, it was done. My name remained on the deed, transferred only under one condition: that Marta and Luca vacate by nightfall, and that the home never be sold to a corporation. They could paint the walls, knock down the pantry, even turn the lemon tree into a swing post. But they could never sell her to someone who would strip her bare. Carlo left with the paperwork. The buyers stayed for a few final measurements. I stepped aside, sipping my second espresso of the day, letting them fill the space with new energy. When they left, I found Marta in the stairwell, a duffel bag over one shoulder. "You'll regret this," she said flatly. I looked her over. She was still holding on to the idea that threat equaled power. I leaned against the banister and replied, "No, dear, I regret not doing it sooner." She didn't respond, just brushed past me, perfume too sweet, suitcase wheels scraping over the floor like a final insult. Luca waited until dusk. He helped me move my last 2 boxes to the car, quietly. No words, just a nod here, a glance there. As he set the green tin in the back seat, he paused. "What happens now?" he asked. "I go," I said. "You learn. To be better?" "No," I said gently. "To be less blind." He didn't answer. But when I shut the trunk, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Humility. I stood in the foyer one last time. The shadows stretched across the floor like fingers reaching out to keep me. I touched the wall beside the coat rack, whispered a thank you. For shelter. For love. For holding me through storms and betrayals. I left the front door open for a moment before locking it behind me. Not out of forgetfulness, but as a symbol. Let the wind say goodbye. Let the house remember who she truly belonged to. As I pulled out of the driveway, I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't sad, but because this kind of ending deserved a smile. I had become the ghost they tried to bury. But I walked out, living, breathing, and holding the pen that wrote the final word. The room I moved into wasn't big. Just enough space for a bed, a window, and a wardrobe that creaked like old bones every time I opened it. But it was mine. No framed wedding photos I hadn't picked. No passive-aggressive inspirational signs nailed to the wall. No one else's coat in the closet or toothbrush on the sink. Mine. I didn't take much from the house. A suitcase of clothes. A tin box of letters and folded notes. One mug. The chipped ceramic one from Amalfi Lorenzo used to claim made coffee taste like Italy and time. And a cutting from my lemon tree, carefully wrapped in damp paper towels and placed in a terracotta pot. That morning I set it on the windowsill and whispered, "Let's try again." The rental was above a cafe, run by two sisters, Daniela and Flora, who made espresso the old way and baked biscotti that tasted like it belonged in your grandmother's cupboard. The first time I came down to pay my deposit, Flora said, "You're the lady who sold the villa, right?" I nodded. She looked me over, then smiled. "Good. That place needed a new story." It did. And so did I. Day one in the new place felt like air after rain. Crisp, light, full of absence that didn't feel lonely. I unpacked slowly, folded sweaters into neat rows, hung Lorenzo's cardigan on the back of the chair, placed the green tin on the bedside table, and then I sat on the bed and stared out at the ocean, just a sliver of it between two rooftops. But enough. I boiled water in a dented kettle and steeped fennel tea. No one interrupted. No one asked me to move. I didn't have to ask permission to turn the radio on or leave the window open or stay in my slippers till noon. Freedom is never loud. It hums. On the second day, Daniela knocked with a tray. "Welcome gift," she said, setting down a plate of almond biscotti and a tiny bottle of limoncello. "You eat when you feel, and drink when you forget." I laughed. "Forget what?" She winked. "Whatever made you start over." That night, I toasted to starting over, one small sip. The glass held up to the moonlight. It glowed like a promise. By the end of the first week, the cafe girls had introduced me to half the block. There was Armando, who painted signs but preferred oil portraits and had a dog that followed him everywhere like an apprentice. Julia, who ran the flower stall and once danced in Vienna before her hips gave out. And old Federico, who sat on the same bench every afternoon and gave weather predictions based on how loud his knees popped. None of them asked about my son, or my daughter-in-law, or what happened in that lemon-colored house I used to call mine. They only asked what I wanted in my coffee, and whether I liked figs. I started writing again. Nothing fancy. Just notes in the margins of old postcards, journal entries in the backs of receipts, thoughts scrawled in loops on cafe napkins. I wrote things I'd been too tired to say when I lived with people who never listened. I kept their plates warm even when they were cold to me. I wasn't a burden. I was the foundation. They mistook my silence for surrender. I folded the papers and placed them in the green tin. Maybe someday someone would read them. Maybe not. But they were mine. Luca called once. Blocked number. I didn't answer. He left a message I didn't listen to. Not because I was bitter. Because I needed to know what my life sounded like without his voice in it. And it sounded clean, like an open window. One afternoon, I sat on the balcony with a book. The lemon cutting had sprouted a new leaf. Just one, pale green and trembling in the breeze, like a child trying to stand. I reached out, touched it gently, and whispered, "Good girl." From below, I heard a laugh. It was Flora, setting out chairs for the evening crowd. "You talking to that tree again?" she shouted up. I smiled. Of course, she survived worse. Week 2, I started helping out in the cafe. Nothing official, just washing mugs, wiping tables, handing out pastries when things got busy. I liked the rhythm of it, the clatter of plates, the hiss of espresso machines, the hum of people coming and going. It reminded me of something I hadn't felt in a long time: usefulness, without obligation. There's a difference, you know? Being useful because you want to, and being useful because you were expected to. In my son's house, I was a fixture, a free babysitter they hadn't asked for yet, a warm body that could be moved aside when new furniture arrived. Here, I was a person, a neighbor, a name. I planted the lemon tree properly on day 15. Daniela gave me a corner in the courtyard behind the cafe. I dug the hole myself, hands in the soil, nails catching on rocks. It wasn't big, but it was deep enough to hold hope. I stood back when I was done, wiped sweat from my brow, and smiled. Another start, this one, rooted. That night, I sat under the tree. The courtyard lights twinkled above me. Music spilled faintly from the cafe, old love songs that hummed through the bricks, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not victory, not revenge, but return. To myself, to the woman I was before grief made me polite, and motherhood made me silent. I sipped fennel tea, and watched the stars stretch across the sky like threads waiting to be stitched into a better chapter. This time, no one was writing it for me. This time, the pen was mine. It was early morning when the first envelope arrived. Plain white, no return address, just my name in careful block letters, Alina Ricci. The kind of handwriting that tries too hard to be neat, tight with shame or nerves. I almost didn't open it. I was sipping coffee by the window, watching the light touch the top of the lemon tree like it was greeting an old friend. The breeze rustled the new leaves, and a dove cooed from the roof tiles. Everything felt too calm to disturb, but I opened it anyway. Inside, a folded letter and a photo. The photo came first. Luca, as a boy, sitting in Lorenzo's lap, covered in flour, grinning wide, a mixing bowl on the table. The background showed my old kitchen, the one Marta had once called too old-fashioned for guests. I ran a thumb across the image. The paper had yellowed slightly around the edges, but their smiles were eternal. Then I read the letter. Ma, I don't know where to begin, so I'm starting with this photo. I found it in a drawer when we were packing. I almost threw it out. Marta said it didn't matter, but I couldn't. I kept thinking about that day, about how Dad let me pour the sugar, even though I always spilled half of it, and how you made us aprons out of dish towels because I'd outgrown mine. I've been angry, and proud, and blind, but I miss you. Leo. No apology, just memory. But that was a start. I folded it carefully and placed it inside the green tin. It belonged there, with the other fragments of truth. Later that day, Flora handed me a second envelope. This came to the cafe, she said, different handwriting. This one was thinner, curvier script. I didn't recognize it right away. Inside, a single card. No letter. The front read, "Congratulations on your new roots." Inside, 2 lines written in ink that had smudged slightly. "Your lemon tree is blooming." I never knew trees could forgive. There was no signature, but I knew who it was. Marta. I didn't respond. Not out of malice. Just distant. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. They're meant to be studied, remembered, and then left behind with grace. That evening, I joined Daniela and Flora for dinner on the rooftop. They brought olives and roasted peppers. I made eggplant parmigiana, the way my mother taught me. Slices thin as lace, fried gently, layered with basil and mozzarella, until the pan sighed under its own weight. We ate under string lights and laughed until the wine ran dry. "Your hands are steady again?" Flora said. I looked down. She was right. No tremble, no tension. They stopped shaking when I stopped asking for permission. I replied. Daniela clinked her glass to mine. To that. The next day, Julia from the flower stall invited me to the community garden. "Just a little space," she said. "You've got the touch." I hadn't gardened seriously since before Lorenzo passed, but something stirred in me when I stepped onto the plot. The scent of tomato vines, the hum of bees, the earth, soft and forgiving. I dug with bare hands, turned soil, planted basil, mint, a few radishes. It felt like breathing with my fingers. In the weeks that followed, the garden became a ritual. Morning started with coffee, then pruning. I'd sit on an overturned bucket and hum softly to the plants. Old songs, lullabies, prayers without words. People started calling it La Curva della Vedova, the widow's bend. Not cruelly, lovingly, like the curve of a river. A place that holds. Then came the interview. A young woman from a local magazine had heard about the cafe, the garden, the woman who planted a lemon tree after selling her family home. She asked questions I didn't expect. Do you regret anything? Yes, I said, staying quiet for so long. What gave you the strength to finally leave? I thought for a moment. Then, answered, being treated like I had no story. Eventually I wanted to prove I still did. She smiled and closed her notebook. You do. The article came out a week later. My photo framed by basil leaves and lemon blossoms on the third page. The headline read, The Widow Who Grew Backwards into Herself. I didn't understand it at first. But as I read, I got it. She meant I didn't reinvent. I returned to something I was before I bent to make everyone else comfortable. The cafe got busier after that. More people asked about the lemon tree. Some brought their own cuttings. A woman in her 70s showed me a photo of her father's vineyard and said, I thought I was too old to start again. You reminded me. I held her hand and said, It's never too late to be stubborn. She laughed like it was a new sound. And still, every few days, another envelope came. Small. No return address. Each one holding a sliver of Luca's past. Drawings he'd made as a boy. A recipe he copied for Father's Day when he was 10. A birthday card I'd forgotten I kept. Each one was unsigned, but unmistakable. He was giving me back pieces of myself. Not asking to come back. Not yet, but rebuilding in his own quiet way. I didn't know if forgiveness would ever take root. But I was no longer the woman who waited in doorways for it. I was the one planting trees and watching them bloom. It was the second Saturday of September when the mayor stopped by the cafe. I was wiping down the outdoor tables, sleeves pushed up, and apron dusted with flour. He came quietly, no escort, no fanfare, just a balding man in a linen jacket with kindness around the eyes and a clipboard under his arm. You're Elena Ricci? He asked. I nodded. He gestured toward the lemon tree in the courtyard. That yours? Yes. It's become something of a town icon, he said with a smile. Mind if I sit? We shared a table. Flora brought us espresso without needing to ask. She'd been eavesdropping from the doorway anyway. The mayor leaned forward, elbows on the table like a man who'd once lived simply and hadn't quite forgotten how. We're creating a feature for the town's centennial, he said. We'd like to include your story. I raised an eyebrow. You want to write about an old widow who sold her house out from under her son? He laughed. No. I want to write about the woman who reminded everyone that legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you choose to keep growing. That phrase stayed with me. What you choose to keep growing. Not inherit. Not protect. But choose. Because in the end, everything that mattered had come down to that. I had chosen to let go of comfort. I had chosen truth over keeping peace. I had chosen a lemon tree and a rooftop garden over being ignored in a house that once smelled like my marriage. And now, in a way I hadn't expected, people were choosing me back. The article came out in the town centennial edition. I didn't tell anyone in advance, but Flora taped it to the cafe wall the same morning. People came in just to read it. A few left notes on napkins. Others slipped envelopes under the door. Thank you for showing us it's not too late. You reminded me I don't have to wait to be invited to my own life. My mother cried when she read this. She planted lavender the next day. I collected them in the tin. Each one, a small echo proof that silence, when finally broken, carries farther than shouting ever could. Julia brought me a bouquet of rosemary and orange blossom. For courage and new beginnings, she said. Armando painted a sketch of the courtyard and handed it to me, wrapped in brown paper. It's not perfect, he said, but neither are second chances. Even Federico, who rarely left his bench, tipped his cap and muttered, You're a damn tree, Elena, sturdy, deep. I laughed. You say that like it's an insult. It's not, he grunted, but it means you'll outlive most of us. I didn't correct him, because I had already outlived a version of myself who believed endurance meant silence. One afternoon, I returned to the cafe to find a small girl sitting beneath the lemon tree. She couldn't have been more than 7, hair in 2 tight braids, scuffed shoes, a piece of paper and crayons scattered at her feet. When she saw me, she held up her drawing. It was the tree, big and yellow, roots sprawling like spaghetti, sky full of stars. "That's you," she said, pointing to a stick figure beneath the branches. "The lemon grandma." I knelt beside her. "You think I'm a grandma?" She nodded, "but not the sad kind." "No? You make things grow. My real grandma just complains." I laughed so hard I had to sit. The girl's name was Sophia. Her mother worked mornings at the bakery and left her with Flora sometimes. Sophia started calling the courtyard the garden that listens. Said it was the only place she could draw without feeling weird. So we made a deal. She could sit under the lemon tree any day she wanted, as long as she gave me a copy of each drawing. By the end of the month, the tin box was full of them. Stars, trees, a crooked version of me with enormous glasses. One picture had a banner across the top. She didn't yell, she planted. That drawing stayed with me, because she saw something no one else ever had. Not even Lorenzo, not even Luca. She saw that I hadn't screamed or fought or slammed a door. I had planted. I'd made room. For peace, for distance, for air. That, I realized, was my rebellion. Marta called 2 weeks later. I recognized her voice immediately, thinner than I remembered, controlled. "Luca told me what you did with the house," she said. "I didn't hide it." "No," she said quietly. "You just didn't warn us." I wasn't obligated to. A long pause. Then she asked, "Do you hate me?" I didn't answer right away. I let the wind from the courtyard carry the silence between us. "No," I said, "I don't hate you." "Then why didn't you say goodbye?" "Because you never said hello," I replied. She didn't call back, and I didn't feel hollow afterward. Another envelope arrived, days later. No return address. Just a single sentence on a torn piece of paper. I planted something too. I didn't need to know more. Whatever it was, flower or thought or apology, it was enough. It meant the house I left wasn't completely empty. Somewhere in all that pride and noise, a seed had landed. And maybe, one day, it would bloom. That evening, I watered the lemon tree under the stars. Sophia had tied a red ribbon around one branch. It fluttered in the breeze like a tiny flag. I whispered to it, "We're doing all right, aren't we?" The leaves didn't answer, but they didn't need to. Some things don't speak. They grow. October came in with soft rain and curling fog. The courtyard glistened by morning. Water gathered on the lemon leaves and ran down the trunk like tears. The tree didn't need to hide. It had grown strong since I planted it. A real trunk now, not just a thin stem. The roots had settled. So, had I. In a way I hadn't since Lorenzo died. I had grown used to a rhythm. Early tea, morning sweep of the cafe porch, helping Flora with the biscotti trays, greeting Sophia with a crayon and a new sheet of paper. Sometimes people asked for me by name. "Elena, which pastry goes best with regret?" "Elena, do you remember the Harvest Moon Festival of 8? "Elena, can I sit near the tree and just—" I never turned them away. Not because I owed them, but because I knew what it meant to need a quiet place that didn't ask questions. But even in peace, echoes, visit. That morning, I found a key in my mailbox. Wrapped in tissue, tied with blue ribbon. No note, no explanation. Just a small brass key I hadn't seen in years. It had belonged to Lorenzo. To a safety box we opened together after he got sick. The last time I'd held it was the day of the funeral. I'd tucked it into the back of a drawer and forgotten. Yet here it was again, returned. I stared at it for a long while, then slipped it into my pocket. That afternoon, I walked to the bank. The same building as before. The walls had been painted since, the chairs replaced with sleeker models, but the same eucalyptus scent hung in the air. When I showed them the key, the clerk hesitated. "Would you mind waiting a moment?" I nodded. 5 minutes later, I was led to a small private room, quiet, cool. Inside, the safe box sat like a closed mouth, waiting to speak. When I turned the key, the metal clunked with finality. Inside was a thick folder, faded banknotes, a single photograph, and a letter with my name on it. The letter was written in Lorenzo's hand. "Elena, If you're reading this, it means time did what it always does. I didn't tell you everything when I got sick. I didn't want our final months to be about paperwork. But I put a few things aside, things I knew you'd need once the world tried to shrink you down to widow, and nothing more. This money isn't much, but it's yours. No one else knows about it. No one else gets to touch it. I made sure of that. Use it for joy, not survival, for something you'd never justify when others were watching. You gave everyone a home. Give yourself something unshareable. Ti amo, per sempre. Burrell? I read it 3 times before folding it back into the envelope. Fingers trembling, not from shock, but from a tenderness so old it surprised me to still feel it. I took the folder, the photograph, and the letter. Left the empty box open. Let it breathe. I didn't tell anyone right away. Not Flora, not Daniela, not even Sophia. I needed to sit with it first. That night I made polenta with anchovy butter and opened a bottle of red Lorenzo used to swear was too good to waste on Tuesdays. I poured a glass, held it up to the photo on the nightstand, and said it's Tuesday. And then I laughed. Because joy, it turns out, doesn't need permission either. The next day, I walked to the travel agency. Not because I needed a trip, because I needed to think about wanting one. I stood in front of the window for 20 minutes, studying posters of coastal trains and olive farms, slow rivers and old museums. When the clerk asked if I wanted help, I smiled. Not today, I said. But soon, back in the cafe, I took out a notebook. Not to write for others, not to record my days, but to plan. A gallery. Maybe. Of drawings by women over 60. Or a fund for girls like Sophia who needed art supplies but no critiques. Or a workshop in the garden where grief could sit beside basil and be watered gently. I didn't need to decide right away. The point was, I could. A week later, a woman I didn't recognize came into the cafe. She held herself like someone who used to command rooms but hadn't been seen in a while. Are you Elena Ricci? She asked. I nodded. I'm Marta's mother. I froze. Then pulled out a chair. She sat. We didn't talk about the house, or Luca, or who said what, when. Instead, she told me about her own mother, and how she'd once been left out of a will for marrying wrong. I thought I was better, she admitted, but maybe we all carry the same poison until someone refuses to drink it. I didn't offer forgiveness, but I offered tea. She drank in silence, then left a small bouquet of chamomile on the table. No note. Just enough. By now, the lemon tree had a name. Sophia called her Signora Sole, Lady Sun. She had begun telling stories to the other kids who passed through the courtyard. About how Lady Sun used to be a broken stick, but grew because someone finally let her rest in real soil. The children listened. Because sometimes, wisdom comes best from small mouths. The mayor visited again, this time with a certificate. Town heritage designation, he said proudly. For the courtyard and the tree. I smiled. Does that mean I have to start charging rent? He laughed. It means this space is officially part of our story now. That night, I taped the certificate beside Sophia's drawing. She didn't yell. She planted. I lit a candle. Not for mourning. For marking the moment. Because I hadn't just left a house. I had left a version of myself behind. The one who folded napkins while people made decisions around her. The one who mistook patience for worth. The one who was loved quietly, then shelved louder. And in leaving her behind, I hadn't become someone new. I'd become someone whole. I never thought I'd live to see people line up just to walk through a courtyard. But one Sunday morning in late October, that's exactly what happened. There was no festival, no stage or parade, just a chalkboard sign. Flora had written in her loopy cursive, "Come sit under the lemon tree." By noon, every chair in the cafe was taken. Mothers, daughters, grandfathers, boys with skinned knees, teenagers pretending they weren't moved. Some came with sketchbooks, others with thermoses of coffee, some with nothing at all, just themselves and a silence they hadn't been able to sit with anywhere else. And still, they came. Sophia took charge without asking. She passed out blank sheets of paper and stubby crayons. She told everyone the rules. Don't ask questions, don't rush anyone. And if you're sad, that's fine, but the tree doesn't like shouting. The adults chuckled, but they listened. There was something sacred about the way she said it, like she was reciting something older than her bones. I stood behind the counter, watching from the window. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a bystander in my own story. I didn't feel like someone who was being tolerated in a home too tight to breathe. This space, this courtyard, this lemon tree, this odd little life I'd built, had grown out of loss, yeah, but it had flowered into something rooted in choice. And that made all the difference. I stepped outside, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, and took a seat on the old bench beneath the tree. No fanfare, no announcement, but slowly, one by one, people joined me. Not to take, just to be. A woman leaned in and whispered, "I'm the age now my mother was when she stopped dreaming." A young man with tattoos on every knuckle asked if the tree had a name. I pointed to Sophia. "Ask the curator." A tourist from Bologna said, "You should charge for this." I shook my head. Some spaces lose their magic the moment you put a price tag on them. Later that week, the priest from Santa Lucia stopped by. He was younger than I expected, with kind hands and the sort of smile that didn't overreach. "I read the article," he said. I nodded. "Most people do before they meet me now." He chuckled. "It's strange, isn't it? To become a symbol. I didn't plan on it. No one ever does. That's what makes it powerful." He sat quietly for a while, then asked if I'd consider speaking at the All Souls gathering. Not a sermon, just a reflection. Something from someone who's seen. I said I'd think about it. But even before the words left my mouth, I knew I'd say yes. That night, I took out the green tin and read every letter again. Luca's short, careful notes. Marta's nameless card. Flora's first recipe scribbled on cafe parchment. Sophia's drawing of Lady Sun with a banner that now felt truer than any biography. She didn't yell. She planted. And I thought, what would it mean to share this not as a cautionary tale, but as a map? To show other women, widows, mothers, forgotten daughters, that there's something on the other side of being erased. That survival is not the ceiling. It's the floor. The night of All Souls arrived with candles lining the stone paths and quiet music echoing from the chapel's open doors. They had placed a single chair at the front, a microphone, a bouquet of rosemary and lemon blossoms beside it. I wore Lorenzo's old coat, not out of sentiment, but because it still carried his scent in the seams, and I wanted to remember that love could be real, even if it didn't get the final chapter you imagined. I stepped up to the mic, not nervous, not proud, just ready. And I spoke. "I've been many things," I began. "A daughter, a wife, a mother, a ghost in my own home, a woman too quiet for the rooms she built." A murmur ran through the crowd. Not discomfort, recognition. "I was told grief would soften me," I continued. "Instead, it turned me into something firmer, like stone, that holds sunlight long after the day's gone." I talked about the lemon tree, about inheritance, not of money or property, but of silence, and how I chose, one day, not to pass that down. And I ended with this. Sometimes, what they call the end is just a door, but only you can turn the handle. I sat down, and for a full minute, no one clapped. They just stood there, still, candlelit, with eyes full of echoes. It was the purest kind of applause. After the service, a young woman approached me. She looked barely 20. "I'm pregnant," she said. "My boyfriend left. My mother says I've ruined everything." I said nothing, just took her hand, pressed a lemon blossom into her palm, and whispered, "Plant something." She cried into my shoulder like I was a place, not a person, and maybe, by now, I was. The next morning, I found a note under the flower pot on my balcony. No signature, just 5 words. "The tree is our cathedral." I smiled, because even though I had no pulpit, no title, no hymns, I had created something holy. Not from doctrine, from dignity. And somewhere, back in the house I once left, I imagined Marta walking past the old living room window. I pictured her stopping, looking at the empty wall where my chair used to be, wondering if maybe, just maybe, it was never the widow who needed to leave, but the way they'd stopped seeing her. The wind changed. That November came in from the sea, carrying something deeper than chill, something old, like memory. I wrapped myself in Lorenzo's coat again, even indoors. Not for warmth, but for the weight. There's a kind of comfort in being held by something that once held you. The lemon tree had lost a few leaves. Natural, they said. Normal, even. But I watched the way it clung to what it could. That quiet resistance. That instinct, not to let go just yet. I understood it well. I was at the cafe alone that Thursday when Luca arrived. No call, no warning, just the old creak of the front door and a gust of cold air behind him. He stood there for a long time, unsure whether to cross the threshold. He looked older, thinner around the eyes. Not ruined, just softened. I didn't speak. I simply poured 2 cups of espresso and set them down. He took a seat without asking. We drank in silence. It was the closest we'd been in 5 years. I walked by the house, he said finally. I nodded. It looks smaller now. It's always been the same size. I replied. You just grew. He swallowed. I didn't know what you were carrying. I didn't want to know. That was your choice, I said. And this, I gestured to the cafe, the tree visible through the window, was mine. He looked down, into his cup. I used to think strength meant control, power, speaking louder than everyone else. And now, he paused. Now I think maybe strength is just staying. Or leaving when staying erases you. He looked up. I'm sorry, he whispered. It didn't fix things. It didn't change the years. But it opened a window in a room I thought would stay sealed forever. That night, I took down the photo of our old family Christmas, the one with Lorenzo holding a young Luca, both covered in wrapping paper and flour. I replaced it with a sketch Sophia had drawn last week. Lady Sun, with long roots and wide branches sheltering tiny stick people beneath. The past, honored. The present, claimed. 2 days later, a woman named Beatrice arrived at the cafe, asking for me. She had white curls and hands stained with ink. I run a printing press, she said. I read your reflection from All Souls. I think we should turn it into something people can hold. I blinked. Like a booklet. Like a compass, she said. So we did. Together, we designed a small printed piece, titled Rooted Letters from the Lemon Tree. Just words, drawings, fragments of what I'd learned. We printed 200 copies. They were gone in 3 days. Someone read it aloud at a women's retreat. A granddaughter mailed one to her nonna in Sicily. The mayor requested a copy for the Civic Library archive. And Sophia? She made me autograph hers. Twice. In December, snow fell in flecks that melted on impact. The lemon tree bent gently, as if bowing to a season it had outlived. It had stopped blooming, but it hadn't stopped being beautiful. That's how I felt, too. One evening, I took the long way home, past the marina, through the square where I once watched Luca ride his first bike. I paused outside my old house. Lights were on inside. Laughter, Marta's laugh, unmistakably sharp, spilled through a cracked open window. I didn't peer in. I didn't need to. That house had never really been mine. Not after Lorenzo passed. It was a tomb for their comfort. And I had built a garden from grief. I returned to my apartment and placed a small lemon blossom on the nightstand, beside Lorenzo's photo. It's done, I whispered. Not the story. The haunting. On New Year's Eve, the cafe closed early. Flora and I shared a bottle of Prosecco on the roof, feet tucked in blankets, faces warmed by the glow of patio lanterns. What do you think next year will bring? She asked. I thought for a moment. More roots, and maybe a few good storms. She smiled. You like storms now? No. But I trust my roof. We clinked glasses. At midnight, bells rang from Santa Lucia. People cheered below, fireworks flashed in the distance. And for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't wish I were elsewhere. Not younger, not back in time, not waiting in some room to be acknowledged. I was exactly where I was meant to be. And I had made it so. Sophia came running up the stairs, cheeks pink from the cold, waving something in her mittened hand. A lemon, she shouted. The tree made a lemon. It was small, imperfect, a little late, but very, very real. We planted it together the next day. She picked a terracotta pot, filled it with new soil, and named the sapling Signorino Sol. A boy tree, she said proudly, to go with his mother. And I thought, maybe that's what legacy really is. Not what you leave, but what chooses to grow again in your presence. I'm not a ghost anymore. I'm not a burden. I'm not a story told behind closed doors by people who never asked what it cost to raise them. I am the root. I am the soil. I am the one who stayed long enough to become unshakable. Let them say what they will. Why is the widow still here? I'll smile softly and say, because the tree is.